Woo!
If you talk to anyone who's ever lived in Dublin, they'll be able to tell you stories about the local characters who live in the area, and they might be, total oddballs or chancers or quirky fellas. And in the middle of the 20th century, there was a lot of them who were perfectly ordinary young men and women who, well, mainly men who went off to war and then they came back shell shocked and they're walking around Dublin in a stupor, and they'd have all sorts of stories around them. And we've heard about Bang Bang, and everyone knows a Johnny 40 coats, no matter where in Dublin they're from. There's some lad who wears too many coats, so they call him Johnny 40 coats. But the fellow we're going to talk about had even stranger quirks and a double life, which is none of the others really got up to. And his name was Billy Davis. And Billy was born without legs. And he roamed these streets here around Stoneybatter and Grangegorman. But what he lacked in limbs, he made up for in the rest of his body, because according to all reports, he had a big mane of curly black hair and lovely deep dark eyes and a well-formed mouth and an aquiline nose and everything. Apparently, he was gorgeous, and he managed to propel himself around Dublin using a fortified iron bowl which he sat himself in, and he used two wooden plugs to row himself along the streets as if they were, canals and waterways, and he was in a canoe or something like that. So he went around about his business like that, and Billy was also a beggar, like a lot of people were back then. But a lot of beggars would solicit off the upper class, the gentry, and visitors to Dublin as well. But Billy decided it was better to kind of smooth in along with the middle class, with the servant girls. A lot of them would work up in the fine houses up in Oxmanstown up above, and he'd go along to the girls who worked there, the simple servant girls from Meath, and he'd get in their good books, and they'd take pity on him, and they'd throw him a few scraps from out the back of the house, whether it was meat or beef or bread and stuff like that, and he'd put it all in his bowl as he'd go along, and it was like he was in a big bowl of stew or something like that, the way he'd go around. But Billy was a bit of a gambler and a bit of a drinker, so scraps and um, leftover food and small change wasn't enough to fund his rockstar lifestyle. So Billy in the Bowl, as he became known, or in some folk songs you'll hear him referred to as Billy in the Bowl, but we'll call him Billy in the Bowl for the time being. Billy decided that he needed a way of getting a bit more money. So one cold, dark March evening at dusk, in the 1780s, according to a lot of the reports, he decided to put this plan into action. So he sat on the street in his bowl, waiting on someone to go by, and unlucky for one young woman going to visit her friends down on Queen Street below, Billy was lying in wait for her, and when he saw her coming, he threw himself out of his bowl into the bush along the gutter at the side of the lane, like you might throw the last glob of soup out of your bowl down the sink, and he lay there waiting and screaming when she went by. He started screaming and crying and moaning, and of course she ran to his rescue to see what was going on. But as she was looking in the bush to see where these screams were coming from, these two massive arms lunged out, these Olympic strength arms, and pulled her in like tentacles, dragging her into the bush. And she basically passed out with the shock, and he grabbed her purse and everything and tucked it safely into his bowl and made his way down the lane. And an hour later, when she came to, she hadn't a clue what had happened. She was in shock. She couldn't give a description of the assailant or anything like that. And of course, nobody was going to suspect the gorgeous beggar going along in the bowl, who everyone loved and everyone pitied. Nobody would suspect that he might be behind the whole thing. So Billy was making a nice earning out of this for a while. He was going along the streets doing this every couple of nights, until one day he took on someone who had a bit more strength than usual, one of the hefty servant girls. He dragged her into the bush, and she put up a fight, and he decided what had to be done was he had to kill her. He had to strangle her. And of course, when the corpse was found the next morning, this hunt was on for the Stoneybatter Strangler, as he was dubbed back at the time. This was massive news. Ireland's first ever police force was mobilised, roaming these streets looking for him. So Billy had to lay low for a while. For about 6 months or so, he'd wasn't up to his old tricks, and he had enough money left over to sustain his lifestyle. But then he was running low, and he decided it was time to go for it again. So back on the beat he went, and he was able to evade the police force until one day on Richardson's Lane, which is over where Collins Barracks Museum is now, a lane leading up to Arbour Hill. He was sitting there waiting when two servant girls, on their way home from town, back up to Oxmanstown, they were going by, and they saw Billy sitting there, and they went over to take pity on him and to admire how gorgeous he was and everything else. And he said to them, "Aren't you two lovely ladies to mercifully come out your way to visit a poor prisoner like me?" And sure enough, one of them got their purse out and started rooting around for some change they could put into his bowl, and the other one got her glass eye out and put it in so she could get a better look at his beauty. And the sight of all their jewellery and all their, their purses and all their gold and all their bling was too much for Billy. He couldn't wait any longer, and he jumped out of his bowl, throwing his bowl at one of the ladies, hoping that would be an obstacle for her as he tried to rob the other one. But them having the power of all their limbs meant that they had the advantage. And one of them grabbed Billy by the hair as the other one was screaming, but sure, nobody would pay attention because it was countryside back then. He pulled him by the hair, grabbed the hat pin out of her hat, jabbed it into his eye, and completely disabled poor Billy lying there screaming. They legged it with all their clothes ripped and their jewellery falling apart asunder and everything else, ran up to Manor Street and told the story of what had just happened to a gang who were waiting around on Manor Street, ratted on Billy basically. They got a big wheelbarrow. They wheeled it back to Richardson's Lane where Billy was lying, still trying to figure out what had happened. They put him in the wheelbarrow, and they triumphantly paraded him up to Green Street Prison, where Billy spent the rest of his life. He was lucky not to be hung, but because he had such strength in his arms, they used him for manual labour, and of course he was a great freak show, being half man, half bull. People would go along and look at him through the bars and have a good gawk at him. But of course, every story has its moral, and decades before Billy set out on this murderous rampage, he was housed in the House of Industry up where James Street Hospital is now, which was a place to house beggars and the destitute and people just like Billy. But according to the Minutes book, on the 1st of March 1774, a direct quote from the book, "It was deemed and resolved that the man in the bowl dish is not a proper person and is to be discharged from the House of Industry." So they decided that Billy wasn't a human like you or I because he was in a bowl and he didn't have legs, and they chucked him out into the streets. And it was because of this that Billy decided that his only way to stay alive was to go around murdering people and stealing their stuff. And Billy the Bowl still haunts this area of Dublin, I'm sure. And if you're walking down any of the quiet lanes here any night and you hear some sort of iron clunking coming behind you, I'd say run for your life just in case it's Billy in the Bowl out to get you again.